Hi, I'm Lindsay. I am a member of the International Socialist Organization in Providence, Rhode Island, for the Providence, Rhode Island / Brown University branch there. I'm also involved in Occupy Providence. We've been occupying Burnside Park for did we just finish 4 weeks? For 4 weeks, and it's going strong. It's really exciting. And I'm very pleased to be chairing this session. The session, in case you're not sure where you are, is part of the Why the Working Class Can Change Society track. And this talk is titled No Power Greater, Marxism and the Centrality of Class. And I think just following on Ashley's talk this morning, there's no question but that this is such a key thing for us to be discussing right now. The question of class is really sort of rocketed back onto the scene, back into discussion. And I mean, right, what is a movement of the 99% except a movement that is based around an idea of class and class interests? So I'm really excited for this talk today. The way this is going to work is Shaun Harkin, who I'll introduce in a second, is going to speak for 30 to 40 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for discussion. There'll be a chair discussion. I'll say a little bit more about that in a few minutes, or after he's done speaking, I'll explain how it's going to work. So that we can have a full discussion, not just a sort of Q&A, and we opened up. We want to be speaking to each other's questions, to each other's comments, so that we have a very full, democratic, exciting discussion. And we'll have a few announcements later, and other things like that. For now, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Shaun. So our speaker, as I said, is Shaun Harkin. He's originally from Northern Ireland, now an activist, longtime socialist in Chicago, where he's also been involved in Occupy Chicago, which is great. It's so exciting to be able to talk about all these movements everywhere. It's so great. He is a writer. He writes for our beautiful socialistworker.org. He also, in Socialist Worker newspaper, he also writes for the contributing writer to the International Socialist Review. I encourage everyone to pick up these publications. Also, totally relevant to this talk, Shaun was on strike in 1997 with the UPS workers, so he's had some
I was 12 years old.
And without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Shaun. So please give Shaun.
I assume that that's for the topic and not necessarily for the speaker, given that you have no idea what I'm going to say. So, good start. So greetings from Occupy Chicago. I should start by saying I've been a socialist now for about 17 years, and this is the best time ever. It's the most exciting period to be a socialist. The man who sold me my first copy of Socialist Worker is sitting over there, and on Thayer Street in Providence. I think it was the right decision to get involved in this, and if you're thinking about joining the movement, now is the time to actually join the socialists and help us fight for a better world. It's also fantastic to be at Harvard right now, because I've been to Harvard in the past and I really felt like I was in enemy territory. And instead right now it feels like Harvard is under siege from all sides. There's essentially a boss's lockout going on because they're terrified that the masses are going to come in and take over the college, which is fantastic. I just heard from a comrade that the janitors working here at Harvard have voted to go on strike. To deliver this news. And so I went to get a cup of coffee, and you have to walk the long way, and there was like 6 different rallies. There was a rally outside Bank of America, there was people chanting everywhere. It really does feel, and it's so important, because what is Harvard? This is the 1% school. This is where the future CEOs of all these corporations internationally come to get trained. It's also the institution that reinforces and legitimizes the ideas of our society that say that this is the way it should be, that the smart people are here and that's why they're wealthy. So it's fantastic to see so much actually going on here. And we really are living in an age of system failure. I mean, 10 million people, as people know, are facing eviction in the US. 25 million people facing unemployment, 2 million in prison, $1 trillion in student debt, which is absolutely unbelievable, and there's new student debt movements beginning to take off. 50 million now in poverty, 50 million people without health care in the United States, and this is the richest country in the world. And so elsewhere in the world, it is much worse. And before the Great Recession, I was just looking up some of these statistics I couldn't find. I don't know if it's changed, but it'll give you an idea of like the inequality that actually exists if people are not already familiar with it. Before the Great Recession broke in 2008, there were 350 billionaires in the world. The top 200 had assets of $1 trillion, which is unbelievable. The wealthiest three of that group had their combined wealth was more than the poorest 48 countries in the world. My guess is that this has got even worse because of the economic crisis internationally. But it's not just system failure, it's an era of resistance, revolt and revolution, and that means hope as well for millions of people who are around the planet who are desperate for some sort of for an alternative. There is a new spirit of resistance that's developing everywhere, and the social force that's capable of transforming society is beginning to reveal itself, it's beginning to find its voice. It's actually getting up off its knees internationally after decades and decades of retreat. Not just retreat because we decided to retreat, but because there was a class war, one-sided class war internationally that really tried to destroy our lives for the sake of profitability. And this is beginning to be turned around, and that's why this moment is so exciting. The Occupy movement has went global. And this movement, as we know, has really redirected and reformed political discussions in the US. It's already given birth to a new generation of revolutionaries who are learning that solidarity is possible, cooperation is possible, that democracy is possible through the General Assemblies. There are people who are learning, despite whatever the debates are, that the police are not on our side, that they will come in and smash up our movements. We're also learning that the Democrats are working for the 1%, and I know this coming from Chicago, where Obama's, second-hand man, or the chief of staff, Rahm Emanuel, has basically declared war on every single group of workers in Chicago. He's denied us a permit. He's arrested 300 people for trying to take control of a public space. And he told the Chicago Teachers Union president, "Fuck you. This is an African-American leader." And Rahm is trying to destroy the teachers' union, but the teachers are actually fighting back, which is really important as well. And it's really bitterness and class inequality that's driving this movement forward. As we know, the rich in this country don't pay taxes, they don't fight in the wars, they don't really care about democracy because they actually control the two political parties. So if you can control them, you don't need to really worry about is democracy flourishing? Is it working? They control the courts, they control the police. And we really have two sides in our society, a profit-mad minority, and the vast majority who have to work for them and are really working today on a check-to-check basis, because that's what people's lives are like in the US. So this talk, that's part of my rant right now. There'll be more ranting. This talk is really a question, it's a discussion about the question of agency. What forces exist that are capable of actually taking on the system and transforming the world. I think that our Occupy movement, there's what the Occupy movement is, and then there's what the Occupy movement has the potential to become. And I think that this movement is about, it's about our right to control society for our needs. What is occupation? It means taking control. If we can control our parks, why can't we control our schools, our libraries, our Walmarts, our post offices, our transit systems, our auto plants? And we really should occupy everywhere. I think that is the message and the hope of this movement. Obviously, Occupy Wall Street has been inspired by the magnificent occupation of Tahrir Square. Egypt's 18 days of revolution really shook the world. Mubarak is gone, as we know, but capitalism is very much intact inside Egypt. And it was really when Egyptian workers entered the struggle that they struck the decisive blow that ended Mubarak's reign through mass strikes. Now, a lot of the media coverage is like these strikes came out of absolutely nowhere. But if you actually go back and look at it, the Egyptian working class began fighting back in around 2004. There was a big economic boom that lasted for 3 years, and there was a tremendous amount of growth and wealth created, and I think workers rightly said, We should be able to share in the profits of all since we created all this wealth. And they began to take on the regime through strikes and building new organisations. And that's what laid the basis then for the kind of mass mobilisation of the working class. So it was built up over a period of time. It didn't really come out of nowhere. So today, revolution in Egypt continues for real democracy. And real democracy means economic democracy. You can't have democracy if you can't control economic decisions. You can't have democracy if you've no control over production and what's produced and what it's used for and what the priorities are. And parliamentary elections aren't enough, even if they do exist in Egypt, because the question of who owns the means of production, who owns the economy, will not be up for a vote in Egypt. It's never up for a vote in the United States. Egyptians right now are building a movement to bring occupied career into every workplace. I think their slogan is, turn your workplace into Tahrir Square. And I think that is a brilliant way to think about what they're doing and how do we learn from that in the United States. If workers can occupy the workplace, they can control the workplace. If they occupy collectively all workplaces, they can really transform society. So the battle over public spaces today is really a training ground in the United States for our future battles to take control of our workplaces. Because the people who are at the centre of these occupations are young workers, and the people who've been joining them are veteran workers from all walks of life. So we have to learn from the international struggles. We have, it was the power of Egyptian workers that shut down the Egyptian economy. It's Greek workers in Europe that can actually use their social power to redirect the priorities of Europe. And that's a fight that obviously has continued. It's not going in the right direction right now, but the battle is far, far from over, because the austerity still has to be imposed, and there's millions of people who have said, we will not take this. And I think that there's an international movement that can actually give inspiration to Greek workers and workers throughout Europe as well. So the struggle to occupy and control the workplace and through its society isn't a new one. And we should be really inspired again and learn from the struggles of workers in the US and internationally who have attempted and have done this in the past. And I just want to quote from it's a new book that Haymarket published. I couldn't find it upstairs, but I would highly recommend people read it. And I think it's really appropriate right now, given that the question of occupation and control is back internationally. It's a book by Emmanuel Ness, and it's called Ours, the Master and the Own, Workers' Control from the Commune to the Present. And in that book, Manny Ness writes, and this is a quote, auto workers staged the most significant sit-down strikes in US history to gain great control of the workplace. In Flint, Michigan, on December 30th, 1936, automobile workers initiated a 44-day occupation of General Motors' Fisher Body Plant No. 1 and No. 2. The strike became the focal point of class war against General Motors, which at the time was the largest manufacturing company in the world. It was the Walmart of the 1930s. It couldn't be organised. It was an absolute fortress for capitalism. Thank you. And the occupation actually forced General Motors to recognise a union, and the Auto Workers Union. And this is really what transformed, the world for working class people in the 1930s. Following that occupation, following the occupation in Flint, there was and this is Manny Ness again, there was an unrelenting wave of sit-down occupations that was sustained around the country. Over the next year, 400 workers participated in 477 workplace occupations in the United States. So the idea that American workers can't be part of a kind of global workplace occupation fight, it's already happened here, and it can happen again. Now what Manny Ness does is, he really documents a whole series of workers' attempts to take control of society, starting with the Paris Commune in 1871, which is the one that, that Karl Marx learned so much about. And really the Paris Commune was the first time that workers in France tried to set up a society without bosses. They abolished the standing army. They created an armed militia of workers to protect the revolutionary democracy. They elected delegates that were subject to immediate recall, and they were paid no more than workers' wages. This was the first attempt, and it became a model for the next generation of revolutionaries, who were really at the centre of the two Russian revolutions, 1905 and 1917. And in both of those revolutions, workers, again, not reading out of a textbook, created what were called workers' councils, the Soviet word, even though it's been degraded today, is Soviet. And workers' councils were, striking workers essentially elected delegates from every workplace, the councils that effectively took over control of whole cities. And the Russian Revolution of 1917 established workers' power on the basis of a nationwide network of workers' councils. And the workers' councils were a new form of democracy from below. And so what it meant was that Russian workers occupied the whole of Russian society and economy, from below. And there's more examples. I mean, in 1920, and this is, if you read about Antonio Gramsci, there was a month-long occupation throughout Italy of workplaces in 1920. It was part of a global wave sparked by, the successful Russian Revolution. In 1936, if you read George Orwell, the author of Animal Farm, that's the book that's most promoted, but his best book is Homage to Catalonia, and he describes workers' power throughout Spain in the battle against Franco, the fascist, where workers essentially began to take control over whole swaths of the Spanish economy. Barcelona, for a time, was under workers' control. Very an example again. But this has happened again and again in recent time. 1956 in Hungary, 1968 in Czechoslovakia, 1979 in Iran, 1980 in Poland. You've got movements of mass working class movements that are seeking and striving for workers' power, that set up new institutions that become an opposite pole of power in society. So you've got the boss's government, and then you have the development of these new institutions that point in a different direction for new priorities. And workplace occupations are not a thing of the past, or displays of workers' power. I mean, we're seeing them all over the world, but just about in the United States, which I think is so important. In 2006, immigrant workers struck across the United States. They shut down LA, the LA port, which is the biggest port in the US. They also shut down 50% of the massive meatpacking industry throughout the US. 5 million workers marched and demonstrated across the country. This was a magnificent display of workers' power, and it also showed that immigrant workers in the United States, whether they're documented or not, are very much part of the American working class, and I think we have to celebrate that and embrace our immigrant brothers and sisters. In 2008, again in Chicago, the birth, I must say as well, of the Haymarket 8-hour day struggle, not to glorify Chicago too much, but out of that struggle, and the workers said this themselves, in 2008, 200 workers in Chicago occupied for 2 weeks. Their workplace was called Republic Doors and Windows. Most of them were immigrants. There was African American workers there as well, who were veterans of the Black Power struggle in the 1960s. And there was also white workers. They took control of their workplace and they said, we are not leaving until, if you're going to close down this factory, we are not leaving until we get everything that we are owed legally and through the contract. And they stayed there until they actually won all their demands. And it forced Obama to actually say that they were doing the right thing. And those workers said that they would never have done that if it hadn't have been for the big demonstrations of 2006. So you see how one big manifestation of class struggle that seems to subside, right? Because that's the nature of class struggle. It's not always up and away. It reproduces itself in a different way. And this was in a workplace occupation where people had the confidence to say, our struggle for legalization and workers' rights means we now have the confidence to actually take over our workplace and occupy it. And again, in Wisconsin, the Democratic Party got all the glory. The last big demonstration was kind of a round of applause and many thank yous for the Democrats that fled the state. But the reality was, and I was down there and Ashley was there, that the only reason the Democrats fled the state was because teachers led a strike movement and occupied the state capital, which meant that the Democrats had to flee the state. If the workers hadn't actually done that, the Democrats would have probably cut a deal much earlier, which they've done over and over again. They would have said, it's not the best, but we think you should accept it, and let's wait for the next election. So this was workers' power, social power, that actually shut down the state capital and it brought in students. It wasn't just teachers. It then became a movement of the Wisconsin working class, and it was joined by workers and students from all over the United States. So that, again, this is a recent display of workers' power right here in the US. So we have to ask the question, why are strikes or occupations of Harvard, of the grass around the school, and workplace occupations so terrifying and so unacceptable to our employers and to society in general? And I think that they have to start with the idea that, which is a fact, that like for capitalism, the idea of private property is sacrosanct. It is. It really means that the right of those who have private property, it's their right to exploit, because 9/10 of the population own no real private property. Toothbrush, yes, car, yes, but not means of production where you gather up lots of workers and bring them in, make products, and then magically you end up with profits. So when workers take control of a workplace or shut down a workplace, it's a fundamental and ideological and practical challenge to the way capitalism functions. When workers refuse to work, no profits are generated, nothing moves, which demonstrates, and this is the secret about capitalist society, it demonstrates that our bosses need us much more than we actually need them. It demonstrates that it's actually our labour and work that creates all wealth in society. They own everything, but that we create everything in this society, and we make it work. And that's why strikes and workplace occupations they begin to reveal where real power or where real potential power lies in society. Lenin wrote an article on strikes, and this is how he put it. He talks about a German minister of the Interior who was a notorious anti-socialist class warrior for the other side. And he said, the guy argued that, and this is not Lenin, this is the German Interior Minister. He says, behind every strike lurks the Hydra of revolution. Now, Lenin isn't saying, the German minister is saying that behind every strike there is going to be a revolution. What Lenin is saying is that what strikes and workplace occupations and mass manifestations of workers' power, what they reveal, it reveals to the people who participate in it how society functions. It reveals the potential power of workers to transform society. And that what you have is in each strike or occupation, you have all of a sudden isolated, atomized, powerless groups of workers who are told from day one, when you're born, this is your lot. There's rich people in society, they deserve to be there. It's unlucky that you were born into the wrong family, in the wrong community, wrong side of the tracks, but this is the way it is. And all of a sudden, groups of workers are able to shut down massive, powerful, politically connected corporations. And this is a tremendous, tremendous learning experience. And this is why there are so many laws and punishments for trying to occupy your workplace, for trying to go on strike. This is why Rahm Emanuel has tried to institute a new set of laws to make it impossible for the Chicago teachers to go on strike, because he knows that a strike is coming, because the Chicago teachers are prepared for it. And I think that they will strike anyway, because they have to fight, because they've got no choice. And so this is the secret that the bosses really don't want us to know about. Over 150 years ago, Marx and Engels wrote the Communist Manifesto. I'm sure most people here, if you haven't, don't worry, you don't need to put up your hand, wrote the Communist Manifesto. And I think that many of the central arguments in that book are more true today and make more sense to people in the midst of this economic crisis and emergent struggle than ever before. And I'm just going to run through what I think the main arguments are. And I think that they really fit for millions of people. I think that they fit more and more what their life experience actually is. So Marx and Engels at the start basically say society's divided into two classes. The exploiters and the exploited. In modern society, it's not a new. The exploited and exploiters is not a new thing. But in modern society, under capitalism, you have the bourgeoisie that own the means of production, and you have the proletarians. In our language, that is simply bosses versus the workers or wage earners. A ruling minority controls the means of production, The vast majority own absolutely nothing other than their ability to work, and that minority exploits the majority of the population and then takes control of the surplus wealth. If Marx argues that all wealth is actually created, not a single item or iota of wealth has not been created through anything other than workers' labour. So that all wealth is created through labour performed by workers in workplaces in the cities where capitalists are forced to kind of gather us up and bring us together. And the way that surplus value is created is we simply don't receive the full value of the products that we create. Bosses call that their profit. We call it the stolen wealth of the working class, and that's what they have done for the last 35 years. They've stolen a lot more of it from our side. This process of exploitation, because that's what it is, breeds never-ending resistance. It breeds organisation, and it breeds revolutionary impulses among the exploited and the oppressed. And when workers engage in struggle, their consciousness can begin to change. They can begin to organise, and they begin to become aware of their own role in society. And it's the objective, strategic position of the workers as agents of creators of wealth, which means that the working class is potentially a revolutionary class. Now, Marx once said, we don't look to the working class because we think that they're gods, because they're definitely not. And, we all know all our shortcomings as working class people. So it was really about the strategic location of workers in society and the role that workers played in creating wealth, and the dynamic of exploitation that breeds resistance is why Marx argued that this class is the first class in history that can actually lead a revolutionary struggle that would abolish all forms of minority class rule. And as a class, millions strong, they have the social power and the interest of destroying capitalism. He also went on to argue that the competitive nature of capitalism leads to anarchy of overproduction. It leads to economic crisis that actually sharpens resistance and demonstrates to more and more people why capitalism, needs to be abolished. And Marx puts it again like this: the way that capitalism organises its regular booms and slumps. It means that the ruling class can't assure an existence to the slave within its slavery, so it drives the slaves into rebellion against the system. But this economic crisis isn't just economic crisis, therefore rebellion. The economic crisis can actually undo workers' organisation as well. That's what we've experienced. The gains that we made from the sit-down strikes in the 1930s, from the movements of the 1960s, have been ripped away from us because economic crisis led to reorganisation of capitalism, where they stole back, the many of the concessions that we have won from them through struggle. Marx and Engels also predicted, and I think that they were absolutely right about this, that capitalism would become a global system. Now, some people on the left, people on the right first, and then some people on the left, argue that globalisation has made the working class less important. But globalisation has actually created a global working class. Paul Mason, and if comrades aren't familiar, this is another book I would recommend everybody read. It's called, it's again published by Haymarket Books. It's called Live Working or Die Fighting, How the Working Class Went Global. And this is how he describes the process that's created a global working class and what it means. He says, industrialisation in the global south, together with the marketisation in the east, has doubled the size of the working class. 1 billion waged workers in the less developed countries, together with 1.47 billion in India and China and the former Comecon countries. Comecon is the former communist bloc, state capitalist bloc. That group of workers in the global south now dwarf the size of the working class in the developed countries, which stands at 460 million workers. And he goes on to argue, says, and their lives, meaning the workers' lives of the world, are articulated together as never before. Globalisation has stretched the manufacturing process across continents and time zones. Digital communications allow the lives of workers in each of the countries to be massively more transparent to each other, which is why we can see what Egyptian workers are doing and Greek workers are doing, and have made our lives much more similar meaning that the impoverishment of the world working class, and if you think about Americans, it used to be the case that Americans were the best paid workers in the world. The impoverishment of the world working class means that our lives globally, there's still differences, but they're much more similar. And the economic crisis has made our lives even more similar as we face mass unemployment, mass austerity to destroy the social wages, the wealth, the social security safety nets, pushing us back to, pre-1890s, the original kind of capitalism that Engels describes in his great book, The Condition of the English Working Class, where you've got no safety net, and you've basically got mass poverty among the working class, and terrible conditions. Another socialist, Mike Haynes, in a recent article, he says, he describes the process this way. He says, between 1970 and 2010, the number of workers in the advanced countries didn't decline. They actually rose from 300 million to 500 million. But in poor countries, their numbers, including their immediate dependents, rose from 1.1 billion to 2.5 billion. And even up to 3 billion. So it's taken all together, you've got a global working class of 3 billion. So our class has actually grown, which means our class internationally has potentially become much more powerful because capitalism again creates its own grave diggers because of the dynamic in capitalism of competition that leads to expansion, the revolutionization, the means of production, and the constant seeking out of new places to exploit, which is why, they went, US capitalists have went to China, they went to India, and everywhere else. So no longer is the world's population, a majority of the world's population engaged in peasant or even more primitive forms of agriculture. We live in an urban world where the first time a majority of people now live in urban centres. Many of them are mass slums, but the reality is capitalism has created a process where it's grouped more and more people in this in the kind of cities. 1 in 4 people in Egypt live in Cairo, which just gives you a sense of what the Tahrir struggle actually meant. It meant that meant that this became the heartbeat, not just of the struggle in Egypt, but of the whole country. So that's a bit. The urbanization is also a very important development. So we have an integrated world economy. Single products are created not